Hi, I'm Jimmy from Bentley Ridge Tree Farm. Today we're going to be looking at some expert pruning tips from an expert himself. Not me. It's Dylan, our production manager out here at Bentley Ridge.
All right, so this is one of our autumn blaze maples that's out in one of our windrows. So unfortunately, unlike our production trees, our windrows often don't quite get the attention that they deserve. And so this is a tree that has missed a little bit of pruning in the past, and I want to show you today couple of issues that can come up when you don't do regular annual pruning, and some ways to try and correct them. So one of the big issues we have on this particular tree is that I've got what's starting to become sort of a modified central leader system. So almost all of the trees we produce on our farm, we produce on a central leader system, which means you have one primary trunk with scaffolding branches coming off laterally. As you can see here, we've got a pretty vertically growing branch here that's starting to grow vertical shoots that will eventually compete with our leader. And you'll get basically a second trunk growing at this low point. And we want to avoid that. For one thing, we've got a pretty bad branch angle right here. It's sitting at north of 60 degrees against that. And you can see right in here, this is what's called occluded bark. And that's when, if an angle of a branch is too tight, the bark will sort of pinch together there. And that's a good sign that that's not a great angle for the branch. And what that will lead to is basically a weak point on that tree. This branch will always be subject to breaking in a strong storm. And so the older that tree gets and the larger that branch gets, the more of a problem that could become for us. So eventually we'd like to remove that branch entirely. Now, an important rule of thumb when you're doing dormant pruning is you don't want to remove more than about 20 to 30% of the overall canopy in any given year. That'll kind of shock the tree and can actually cause it to go into decline. So I can't take this whole branch today. That would just be too much of the canopy. So we're going to kind of bring this thing down in this year, knowing that we have time to come back in subsequent years and eventually cut this so that it's flush and we no longer have this competing branch here. All right, so here I've got a few of the tools that we're going to use today in doing our dormant pruning. Always a good thing to have on hand and just bring with you when you're going out to do your pruning. That way you're not having to run back and forth all day to get them. Obviously, we've got our big loppers, handy for doing some of the larger cuts up there. Nice little set of hand pruners here for the smaller cuts. These will probably be most of what you're using, especially on a younger tree. When you're getting your loppers out because you've got some big cuts to make, that's when you kind of need to do some of that evaluation on, am I starting to get north of that 20 to 30% rule? Because if you're making big cuts, that's more wood coming off the tree. And so you just want to be careful before you start going too crazy with the loppers. Got a hand saw here. This is handy if you need to do some really large cuts, which occasionally you do need to do, and we'll show you later in the video a proper way to do some of those larger cuts using a hand saw. And then one of the most important and underrated tools out here is just some isopropyl alcohol. You really need to be careful that you're cleaning your tools off between different trees that you're pruning. Trees can harbor a lot of different pathogens in the wood, and one of the easiest ways to spread diseases between trees or any other plant material is by not properly sanitizing your pruning equipment between trees. So before I get started, I always like to just make sure, take some of this isopropyl and clean off all of our tools between trees. Make sure you're using at least a 70% alcohol. I use a 99, figure it can't hurt to be a little more careful, but 70 will work for you. An important thing to keep in mind is always to be safe while you're pruning your trees. So I've got Ethan out here helping me steady the ladder, make sure I don't take a fall today. So there's a few different types of cuts that we'll do while we're pruning. And I'd like to show you two important ones are thinning cuts as well as tipping cuts. So a thinning cut is going to consist of coming back to a branch. So when you're making a thinning cut, you want to come right back to the base of the branch you're cutting back to and make that cut at a slight angle, utilizing the collar of the branch. The collar is this slightly swollen area right outside of the branch's union with the trunk or the branch it's coming off of. Make sure you don't cut inside that collar, or the specialized cells that heal the wound won't be able to properly heal it, and you'll have an open, exposed wound on that tree that can lead to subsequent infection or just a harder time for the tree to heal from the cut. You also don't want to cut too far outside of that collar, or those cells won't be able to reach around the cut and properly heal it either. Now a tipping cut would be to bring this back, and there basically you're just looking, instead of coming all the way back to a branch, you're coming back to a bud. Usually you want to look for an outward facing bud. This is going to encourage that bud to grow out and create more of that open vase-shaped canopy, which is ideal for most types of trees. So, for example here, I'd like to bring it down so that it's coming below this next scaffold of branches. We want to build the shape of the tree as we do our pruning. And so we're going to come down so it's below here. I've got a nice outward facing bud here. Come up about a 1/4 inch past that. Cut at a slight angle that matches the angle of the bud. There you go. So now I'm going to do a couple more larger cuts. These are going to be a couple thinning cuts to bring this whole branch down so that I've got my central leader. Again, eventually with the goal of trimming this down so we can get rid of this branch altogether. Another thing to look for when you're pruning is what we call crossing branches. And that's a branch that's basically crossing into the territory of another branch where you want to build that scaffolding. Now, autumn blaze maples tend to grow pretty symmetrically, and so we don't have a lot of examples of cross branches on these. You may see them more in things like crab apples, and a lot of oak species will do this. But we do have an example right here where you can see the branch coming out on this side of the tree, but then the new growth crossing over. And that's just going to clog up our canopy. You can imagine as these branches grow and expand, they're really going to cause issues up in the head of the tree here. And so we want to go ahead and get rid of that. So one thing we always want to make sure we're taking care of during dormant pruning is getting rid of dead tissue. That can be done any time of year. If you ever go and you see in your tree that a branch broke, or perhaps an insect killed a certain part, or a disease, it's always good to remove dead tissue anytime that you see it. But sometimes it's a little tricky to tell when tissue is dead, especially during the dormant season. Now, on our autumn blaze maples, usually the new growth has this really nice red coloring to the bark. You can see the buds are even starting to swell here a little bit. That's pretty easy to tell, versus here we have a dead branch, very brittle, breaks off easy. But if you're ever not positive, you can do what's called a scratch test. And that's basically just coming up, use your fingernail or even just the edge of your pruners, scratch off just that outer layer of bark. And what you're looking for here, I'll show you on some live tissue, is that green color in there. And any shade of green in there, that means you've got nice live tissue. Nutrients and water are moving through that tissue. Here you can see it's just brown. That's dead tissue. So that's always something you want to go ahead and take care of during dormant pruning. So what we just did was the primary pruning on this tree. removing some aggressive lower branches that were starting to outcompete the scaffolding built above them. And when I say that, scaffolding is basically these whorls of branches that we'd like to space out at least about 18 inches between them for a permanent branching structure. Now, when the trees are young, I like to have some smaller branches intermixed between those primary scaffolds. That helps just bring in more nutrients, more photosynthase for the tree to grow, helps build caliper on the lower trunk, but eventually those can be removed as the tree grows larger, and you can just sort of keep your permanent scaffolding. Now, one problem I've got on this tree is a double coming out here, and that's basically when two branches start emerging from the same growth point on a tree, and that's always going to be sort of a weak point. Basically, they're sharing the same space there, and so as they grow together, that can create another weak point on the tree. So here I've got one of those doubles. I need to choose one to remove. They're both pretty sturdy, strong branches. Neither one have bad angles to them. So what I'm really looking at here is balancing the tree. And so I can see I've got quite a bit of growth kind of already in the area that this branch is going to. This branch is sort of filling in a space that I could use some more growth to balance out the tree and just make it a little more symmetrical and a little more aesthetically appealing. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove this, again making a nice cut right at that collar of the branch so that it heals over nicely. You'll notice, especially with maples, when you're pruning in the springtime, they will bleed a lot, and that's just them releasing water out of these cuts that you make. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's a very normal response to pruning for maples. They just tend to push a lot of water up through their roots as the season warms up coming into spring. So one issue we have with this tree is that it's trying to throw multiple leaders at the top here. And for that central leader system to promote good vertical growth and proper branching, we need to bring this down to just one leader. So keeping in mind, again, that 20 to 30% rule that we're trying to maintain while we do our dormant pruning, I need to select just one of these leaders. For this one, I like this branch. It's got a good angle to it and already starting to put up some nice vertical growth to it. So we're going to remove this branch. You can see our old central leader here actually got outcompeted by these branches and died off. So we'll remove that as well. And then to help promote a nice straight trunk on this, we are going to attach a fiberglass pole to this. Now you can use bamboo, you can use shorter stakes. Basically it's giving that trunk something to climb and something that we can tie on to. So I like to use fiberglass posts because they're a little bit flexible. They still give support and something that you can tie this on to, provide a rigid structure for the trunk to climb and create that straight trunk and give your central leader something to grow onto. But they have some flexibility and they'll move in the wind a little bit, which really aids in the building of caliper for the tree, which gives it a stronger base to grow on. All right, so I wanted to show kind of the purpose of two different types of cuts that you might make during pruning, one being a thinning cut and one being a tipping cut. A thinning cut is used when you want to increase the space inside the canopy of the tree. So any pruning cuts you're going to make will basically help in shaping the tree, and they're going to slow the growth of that area. But a thinning cut can be used to open the canopy up a little more, because what we're doing is we're leaving the terminal bud on here, and the terminal bud is always going to promote more growth of that branch in the direction it's already going. So A thinning cut would be to remove this branch and leave this one so that now the growth will continue out this way and create more space within our canopy. Now, a tipping cut would be used if I wanted to increase the density of a certain area. So let's say I've got kind of an open space right here, and tipping cuts are especially useful on flowering trees and fruiting trees where the 1-year-old growth is where you're going to see those flowers or the fruit that you're producing. So if I wanted to create a denser canopy in this area, I come back and I do one of those tipping cuts to a non-terminal bud. Typically, we want to look for an outward-facing bud, cut about 1/4 inch above it. And that's going to cause these other buds below it to throw more canopy and create more flower clusters, more fruit, or just a denser canopy if you have kind of an overly open area that you're looking to fill. All right, so sometimes you will need to remove a little bit larger of a branch. And when you're doing that, you want to be careful not to cause a overly large wound on the trunk of the tree. And the easiest way to do that is what I call a 1, 2, 3 cut. Some people call it a jump cut. But basically, you're going to be doing 3 separate cuts into this branch so that when you drop it, it doesn't tear bark off of the central trunk. So first thing you want to do is come out about 6 inches or so from where you want to make your final cut, which again is going to be right on that collar of the branch. You come from the bottom and cut in about 1/3 to a halfway through the branch. Then you're going to come about 1 inch or 2 past that first cut from above, maybe not a whole inch or 2, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and cut down through it. And basically, that's going to lead to when that falls, your bad wound is where you made that first cut. So now I have a lot less weight when I can do my final cut. It's really easy to keep that as a nice clean cut without the extra weight of that whole branch causing it to tear. You get a nice clean cut.
Hopefully the tips that Dylan provided in this video are as useful to you as they are to me. Maybe next time I'll be the expert. Thank you.